At dinner with my son and his wife, I suddenly collapsed. My daughter-in-law screamed, but when she checked my pulse, her face went pale and she whispered, "We have to leave now." I stayed on the floor with my eyes closed. What I heard next confirmed she'd been poisoning me. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and comment from which part of the world you are watching. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. The taste of the stew was the last thing I registered before the world tilted. It was a familiar recipe, one I had taught my son, Marcus. But that evening, it carried a faint metallic hint I had ignored as a trick of my tired senses. My fork clattered against the plate. The warm, golden light of the dining room chandelier fractured into blinding shards. Marcus's voice, saying my name, seemed to come from the end of a long tunnel. Then the floor rose to meet me, the cold of the tiles a shock through my dress. I did not lose consciousness. My body betrayed me, limbs heavy and unresponsive, but my mind, trained by decades of nursing, snapped into a clinical alertness. I lay still, eyes closed, listening to the chaos I had caused. "Mom! Ellie!" Marcus was beside me, his hands on my shoulders. "Call an ambulance." There was a scrape of a chair. Then I heard Chloe's voice close to my ear, low and urgent. It was not directed at me. "Marcus, we have to leave now." It was the fear in her whisper that froze the blood in my veins. It was not fear for me. It was the panic of a plan unraveling too publicly. "What are you talking about?" Marcus's voice was strained. "Help me with her." "No, listen," Chloe hissed. "We should go, before they get here. It looks bad." Then I felt it. Fingers pressed against my wrist, seeking a pulse. But the touch was not assessing with a caregiver's concern. It was quick, confirmatory, a check. The gesture of someone verifying a predicted outcome. Her perfume, something expensive and floral, enveloped me as she leaned close. She held my wrist for a count of 3 seconds, then released it. I heard her exhale, a short, sharp sound. In that moment, on the floor of my son's dining room, a fundamental truth rearranged itself. This was not an illness. This was an action. And my daughter-in-law had just checked its progress. The ambulance ride was a blur of sensation and muffled sound. I allowed my eyelids to flutter, murmured incoherently, playing the part of the disoriented patient. At the hospital, under the sterile white lights, I gave concise answers to the doctors. I described the metallic taste. I listed what I had eaten. I mentioned the homemade stew. Marcus hovered, his face pale with a worry that was genuine and gut-wrenching. Chloe stood slightly behind him, a portrait of composed distress. She held his arm, her grip tight. I watched her from my gurney, seeing her anew. The polished blonde hair, the tailored blouse, the way her eyes darted to the monitors and then to the doctor's face, searching for information. Tests were run. Blood was drawn. Hours passed. The attending physician, a weary man with kind eyes, finally came to my curtained bay. "Mrs. Vance, your blood work shows some elevated levels. There are traces of a compound we don't see often. It can cause gastrointestinal distress, dizziness, weakness. Given the presentation and the quick resolution of your symptoms, we're leaning toward a case of accidental food poisoning, perhaps a contaminated herb or spice." "A compound?" I asked, my voice deliberately weak. "Nothing to be overly alarmed about," he said, offering a reassuring smile. "It's likely something that disagreed with your system. We'll keep you for observation for a few more hours, but I expect you'll be able to go home." Accidental food poisoning, a convenient, vague conclusion. I nodded slowly, accepting the diagnosis, but my mind held on to his words. Traces of a compound we don't see often. Marcus drove me home in the early hours of the morning. Chloe sat in the passenger seat, a silent silhouette. The car was thick with unspoken words. "I'm so glad you're okay, Ellie," Chloe said, turning to look at me as we pulled up to my house. Her smile was a perfect, concerned curve in the dim dashboard light. You gave us such a fright. I feel terrible about that stew." "It's not your fault, sweetheart," I said, layering my voice with a frail gratitude. "These things happen." I allowed Marcus to help me inside, to settle me on my own sofa. He fussed with blankets, brought me a glass of water. His love was a tangible, aching thing. Chloe lingered in the doorway, a watchful presence. "We should let you rest," she said finally, touching Marcus's arm. After they left, the silence of my house descended. It was not a peaceful quiet. It was a listening one. I replayed the evening, the dinner invitation. Chloe's insistence on cooking. Her special touch, a small jar of what she called finishing salt, a gift from a boutique she loved. She had sprinkled it over the stew with a flourish. "It elevates everything," she had said. I had eaten it without thought. I rose from the sofa. The weakness was fading, replaced by a cold, clear energy. I went to my kitchen, the heart of my home, with its warm oak cabinets and the view of my herb garden. The dawn was just breaking, painting the world in soft grays. I opened my laptop at the kitchen table. The doctor's phrase echoed. A compound we don't see often. I began to search using the precise methodical language of my old profession. I cross-referenced symptoms, the delayed onset, the metallic taste, the muscular weakness, the rapid superficial recovery that masked ongoing cellular stress. It took an hour. The compound had a long clinical name. Its primary use was industrial, but in small, carefully measured doses, it acted as a cumulative poison, slow and insidious, mimicking the decline of natural illness. It was difficult to detect unless one was specifically looking for it. It could be administered in something as simple as salt. I sat back in my chair. The morning sun now streamed through the window, illuminating the vibrant green of my rosemary and thyme outside. I thought of Chloe's hand on my wrist, her whisper, "We have to leave now." This was not a suspicion born of paranoia or petty dislike. It was a conclusion built on medical knowledge, witnessed action, and chemical fact. Someone had tried to poison me. The person most likely to benefit from my gradual fading was the one who had checked my pulse not to help, but to confirm. A profound sorrow settled in my chest, cold and heavy. This was my son's wife. This was the woman he loved. And she had looked at my life and decided it was an obstacle to be removed. The sorrow did not last. It hardened into something else, a resolution. They thought I was a vulnerable old woman, a retired nurse who grew herbs and doted on her son. They had mistaken my warmth for weakness. I closed the laptop. I looked at my hands, capable hands that had healed so many. They would not be used to inflict cruelty, but they would be used to gather, to plan, to prove. This was no longer just about a bad taste at dinner. This was a declaration of war conducted over a family meal, and I had just decided to answer it, not with rage, but with proof, not with violence, but with the utter, undeniable exposure of the truth. My first move was simple. I picked up the phone. I called Marcus, making my voice sound tired but fond. I told him I was feeling much better. I said the scare had made me realize how much I valued our family dinners. I suggested that next week, to ease everyone's mind, they should come to my house. I would cook. The line rang twice before Marcus answered. His voice was thick with relief. "Mom, you're really feeling better?" "Much better," I said, keeping my tone light and weary. "Just a little shaken. That hospital visit made me realize I miss our proper dinners, at my house." There was a brief pause. I could picture his face, the concern softening into agreement. "Of course. We'll come to you. You shouldn't be lifting a pot." "Nonsense. Cooking will do me good, but," I added, injecting a playful note, "you can be in charge of the wine. Next Saturday?" I heard the muffled sound of his hand over the receiver, a low conversation with Chloe. Her voice was a distant, indecipherable murmur. Then he was back. "Saturday's perfect. We'll be there. Just don't overdo it." "I won't. I promise." I hung up. The invitation was the first move. The trap was set. Now I needed the bait. My research had given me a name for the poison, but I needed to understand its delivery. Chloe had used her finishing salt. I recalled the small glass jar with a cork stopper, the label handwritten in faux Italian script. She had brought it with her that night, presenting it as a gourmet novelty. I needed to see it again. Better, I needed to replace it. Over the next 2 days, I performed the part of a recuperating woman. I moved a little slower when I knew neighbors might see me fetching my mail. I made brief, reassuring calls to Marcus. I spoke to Chloe once, thanking her again for her help at the hospital. Her sympathy was smooth and practiced, a veneer I now heard as hollow. On the third morning, with purpose solidifying my steps, I drove to a specialty food market across town. It was the kind of place Chloe would frequent, all artisanal cheeses and imported oils. I found the spice section. There were numerous salts, flaky sea salt, smoked salt, black lava salt. And then I saw it. Pink Himalayan salt, ground fine, in a small glass jar with a cork stopper. The brand was different, but the visual similarity was striking. I purchased 2 jars. At home, I emptied 1 jar into the sink. I washed and dried it thoroughly. Then I filled it with ordinary table salt I ground to a similar consistency in my mortar and pestle. The color was off. The white was too pure, lacking the pinkish hue. I considered my options. A single drop of natural food coloring, a whisper of paprika for tint? No. Any additive could be detected, could arouse suspicion. The substitution had to be perfect in function, not necessarily in aesthetics. The poison had been undetectable by taste. The visual difference would be a risk, but one I had to take. I left the salt white. The second, unopened jar I placed in my pantry, a control sample, a piece of potential evidence. My plan required access to their home. I needed to make the switch before Saturday. An opportunity presented itself sooner than expected. Marcus called on Thursday. "I'm going to be in your area later, Mom. I have a meeting that should finish early. Can I stop by just to check on you?" "I'd love that," I said. Then, as if an afterthought, "Oh, before you come, could you do me a small favor? I left my good reading glasses at your house last week. The black case. They're probably in the living room. Could you bring them?" "Sure, no problem. See you soon." He arrived just after 2. He hugged me tightly, his concern a palpable force. We sat in my living room with tea. He looked tired. "Work is busy?" I asked. "Always. And with everything that happened..." He shook his head. "Chloe's been really worried about you." "That's kind of her." I sipped my tea. "She's been so attentive, always bringing those little gourmet touches to our meals." I let my gaze drift, seemingly nostalgic. That special salt she used last time, it had such a unique color. Pink, wasn't it? Marcus looked faintly puzzled. "Was it? I didn't really notice. You know I just eat what's put in front of me." I laughed softly. Typical. Well, it was a nice gesture. I changed the subject. After 30 minutes, he remembered my glasses. "Here," he said, pulling the black case from his jacket pocket. "They were on the side table." "Thank you, honey. You're a lifesaver." I took the case, my fingers steady. "How is everything at home? All quiet?" "Quiet enough," he said. He finished his tea and stood. "I should get back. You're sure you're okay for Saturday?" "Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it." After he left, I placed the glasses case on the table. That was not why I had asked for it. The request had served its purpose. It gave Marcus a reason to be in his own living room before coming to me, making it natural for him to have potentially seen or handled other items. It created a plausible reason for any later discrepancy Chloe might notice. Her husband had been in the house, fetching things. Now I needed the jar. I waited until nightfall. I drove to their neighborhood, parking a street over. Their house was dark except for the porch light. Marcus had mentioned a late client dinner. Chloe, I knew from a passing comment days earlier, had a board meeting for a charity she supported on Thursday nights. It was a regular commitment. I used my key. I had never abused this privilege, this symbol of family trust. The lock turned with a soft click. I stepped inside, closing the door silently behind me. I did not turn on any lights. The glow from the street lamps outside provided enough illumination to navigate the sterile, modern space. It felt like a museum, not a home. I went directly to the kitchen. My heart was a steady, mechanical drum in my chest. There was no fear, only a high-pitched focus. I opened the cabinet above the stove. Cooking oils, vinegars, not there. The spice rack was a minimalist magnetic strip on the wall. Sea salt, black pepper, dried herbs, no specialty jar. I checked the pantry. Neat rows of cans and boxes. And there, on a shelf beside other gourmet items, truffle oil, aged balsamic, I saw it. The small glass jar with the handwritten label, pink salt. I took it down. Using a small pen light, I examined it. The salt inside had the same faint pink hue. This was it, the vessel. From my pocket, I retrieved the jar I had prepared, filled with white salt. I placed it on the shelf where the original had been. I put the original, the potentially poisoned one, into a sealed plastic bag, then into the deep pocket of my coat. My task was complete, but I hesitated. A woman who poisons does so with calculation. She would have a supply. She would not keep it all in one obvious jar. I swept the penlight beam across the pantry shelf again. Behind a box of artisan pasta, my light glinted off glass. I moved the box. There was a second, identical jar, full, a reserve. This was evidence, pure, unadulterated evidence. She could claim the jar I had just taken was for cooking, a strange gift. But a hidden second jar? That spoke of intent. I took that one too. I sealed it in another bag. I returned the pasta box to its position. I stood for a moment in the dark kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. I had what I came for, more than I had hoped for. I left as quietly as I had entered, locking the door behind me. The night air was cool. I drove home, the two jars resting on the passenger seat like accusatory passengers. In my own kitchen, under the bright lights, I did not open the bags. I would not taste or smell the contents. I labeled them with the date and location found. I placed them in a locked metal box I kept for important documents. The harmless white salt in the duplicate jar sat in my own spice cabinet, a placeholder. The stage was now fully prepared. The bait was in position. Chloe would come to my kitchen on Saturday, see a familiar jar, and believe her weapon was at hand. She would use it, and I would be waiting. I looked out at my herb garden, silvered by moonlight. The rosemary stood straight and resilient. I had spent years cultivating life, understanding growth. Now I found myself in a different kind of cultivation. The harvest would be truth, however bitter its taste. The days between my nighttime retrieval and Saturday's dinner passed with a slow, deliberate tension. I occupied myself with legitimate preparations. I selected a menu, a hearty beef bourguignon, something that required long simmering and would fill the house with comforting, familiar smells. I bought the ingredients. I aired the dining room. I performed the routine of a grandmother looking forward to a family meal. When Saturday arrived, I dressed carefully. I chose a soft, lavender-colored cardigan, a color that tended to wash me out to emphasize shadows under the eyes. I applied minimal makeup, leaving my face looking naturally tired. I was not playing the part of an invalid, but of a woman still recovering, putting on a brave face. They arrived at 6. Marcus came in first, carrying a bottle of wine and his usual warm embrace. "You look good, Mom." "Rested." "I feel it," I said, squeezing his arm. Chloe followed, a vision of crisp, autumn elegance. She carried a bouquet of orchids, exotic and out of season. "Ellie," she said, her smile perfect, "these are for you, to brighten your space." The flowers were beautiful, cold, and utterly without the warmth of something from a garden. They were a prop. "They're stunning, dear. Thank you." I took them, our fingers brushing briefly. Her skin was cool. "Please, come in. Make yourselves at home. I'm just finishing up in the kitchen." "Let me help." Chloe said immediately, already shedding her tailored jacket. It was not a question. It was an assumption, a move to control the board. "Oh, you don't have to," I demurred, waving a hand weakly. "Nonsense. You should be resting. Marcus, pour your mother some wine. I'll handle the final touches." She swept past me toward the kitchen, a general taking command of friendly territory. I exchanged a look with Marcus, offering a small, grateful smile. He shrugged, smiling back, pleased at the show of care. He led me to the living room, poured the wine, and began telling me about his week. I listened with half an ear, my focus on the sounds from the kitchen, the clatter of a lid, the running of water, the opening of cabinets. After a few minutes, I excused myself. I should at least check on the stew. My recipe can be fussy. In the kitchen, Chloe had taken charge. She had found my apron and tied it over her silk blouse. She was tasting the bourguignon from a wooden spoon. "It needs a touch more depth," she announced, as if it were her own creation. "Perhaps a pinch of salt," I said, my voice mild. I moved to the stove, peering into the pot. I made a show of looking around the counter. Now, where did I put my good sea salt? It was right here. I opened a cabinet door, then closed it with a slight sigh. My memory isn't what it was since, well, you know. Chloe's eyes scanned the countertops. I had placed the jar, the one I had filled with white table salt, prominently near the spice rack, but not in it. It stood apart, noticeable. "Is this it?" she asked, picking up the jar. She examined it. Her brow furrowed slightly. "This looks different. The salt is white." "Is it?" I leaned in, squinting. "Oh, that old thing. I must have refilled it with my regular salt. The pink kind ran out ages ago. I keep meaning to get more." I waved a dismissive hand. "The regular will do fine. Just a pinch." I turned away, busying myself with fetching the bread basket. I watched from my periphery. Chloe held the jar. Her hesitation was brief, almost imperceptible. I saw the calculations flash behind her eyes. The jar was familiar, the context was perfect. Her mother-in-law, frail and forgetful, had unknowingly provided the vehicle. The poison was gone, but the symbol remained. Using it would be a psychological reinforcement, a private victory. She unscrewed the cork stopper. She pinched a generous amount of the white salt between her fingers and sprinkled it over the stew. She gave it a stir. "There," she said, a note of finality in her voice. "That should do it." "Thank you, Chloe," I said, turning back with a warm smile. "You're such a help." The moment settled between us. She believed she had just seasoned the meal with a weapon. I knew she had seasoned it with plain salt. The trap was not in the poisoning, but in the act itself. She had taken the bait. Dinner was served. The dining room was cozy, lit by the same chandelier under which I had collapsed 2 weeks prior. I took my seat at the head of the table. The stew was served. The aroma was rich and savory. "This smells incredible, Mom," Marcus said, lifting his spoon. "Chloe added the finishing touch," I said, lifting my own spoon. I met Chloe's eyes across the table. I took a deliberate, slow bite. I chewed. I swallowed. Perfectly seasoned. Chloe watched me, her smile fixed. She ate a bite of her own, her movements precise. The conversation flowed, carried by Marcus. He talked about work, a vacation idea for next summer. I contributed, asked questions. All the while, a silent clock was ticking in my head. Chloe was waiting. She was anticipating a specific reaction on a specific timeline. I began my performance gradually. First, a slight tremble in my hand as I reached for my water glass. I set it down carefully. Then, a slow, deliberate blink, as if clearing spots from my vision. I let my responses to Marcus lag by half a second. "Mom," Marcus said, his fork pausing midair, "you okay? You look pale." "I'm just a little warm," I said, my voice softening. I pressed the back of my hand to my forehead. "It's nothing. The food is wonderful." Chloe was silent, her gaze intense. She was not looking at me with medical concern. She was observing a process. She was checking the time. I let my breath catch. A small, sharp intake. My fingers went to my throat. I feel a bit lightheaded. Ellie? Chloe's voice was sharp, probing. It's like before, I whispered, letting genuine fear into my eyes. Not fear of poison, but fear of the moment, of the step I was about to take. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping loudly on the floor. I stood, swaying. I gripped the edge of the table. "Mom!" Marcus was up, his chair clattering backward. I didn't make it to the floor this time. I let my knees buckle, but I directed my fall toward Marcus. He caught me, lowering me into his arms. My eyes were open but unfocused. I let my head loll against his shoulder. "Call an ambulance!" he barked at Chloe. But I was watching her. Through my half-lidded eyes, I saw her face. I saw the initial fleeting flash of triumph. It was there, bright and cold. Then it fractured. It was replaced by confusion. Her eyes darted from my face to the stew pot and back. Her calculations were misfiring. The timeline was wrong. The symptoms were superficially similar, but the progression was off. This was too fast, too dramatic for the slow, insidious compound she thought she had used. Her pale, polished face showed not the satisfied concern of a plan coming to fruition, but the stark, panicked horror of a plan gone wildly, dangerously off script. She hadn't checked my pulse this time. She just stood there, frozen, staring at the woman in her husband's arms, realizing something was very, very wrong. And in that moment, as Marcus held me and shouted into his phone, I had my first concrete piece of proof. It wasn't in a lab report. It was etched on the face of the woman who had tried to kill me. Her reaction was not that of a frightened family member. It was the look of a strategist who has just lost control of the game. The second ambulance ride was a study in contrasts. The first time, I had been genuinely disoriented, my mind racing to catch up to a terrifying new reality. This time, my mind was the calm center of the manufactured storm. I lay on the gurney, allowing my body to remain limp, my breathing shallow. I listened. Marcus held my hand, his grip tight. "Just hang on, Mom, we're almost there." His voice was raw with a fear that cut through my performance, a reminder of the real cost of my deception. Chloe sat opposite him. She was silent for most of the ride. Then, as the hospital neared, she spoke, her voice low and urgent, pitched for Marcus alone. "Marcus, listen. This is exactly like last time. It has to be something in her house, something she's eating or using that we don't know about. An allergy, maybe, or a contaminant." She was already rewriting the narrative, shifting the source of the poison from her kitchen to mine, planting the seed of doubt about my own home, my own habits. "What are you talking about?" Marcus's voice was strained. "She was fine until dinner." "Was she?" Chloe pressed. "She's been alone, recovering. Who knows what she's been consuming? Old spices, maybe, or something in her garden. Some of those herbs can be toxic if used wrong." I felt a cold admiration for her quick thinking. She was agile. She was trying to redirect the investigation before it could even begin. At the hospital, the process repeated itself, but with a different tenor. I was examined by a new doctor, a younger woman with a brisk efficiency. I described my symptoms with clinical precision: the acute onset of dizziness, the metallic taste at the back of my throat, the muscular weakness. I made sure to mention it was the second such episode in as many weeks, both following a family meal. "But the meals were at different residences?" the doctor asked, looking up from her tablet. "Yes," I said, my voice weak. "The first was at my son's home. Tonight's was at mine." I let my eyes drift closed as if exhausted. My daughter-in-law was kind enough to help me cook. She even seasoned the stew. I did not accuse. I simply stated facts. The doctor ordered blood work. As she left, Chloe moved to follow her into the hallway. I kept my eyes slitted, watching. Through the gap in the curtain, I saw Chloe touch the doctor's arm, a gesture of conspiratorial concern. I could not hear all the words, but fragments carried. history of very stubborn. Won't throw out old food. We've been so worried. She was painting a picture, an elderly woman set in her ways, accidentally poisoning herself through neglect. It was a clever, vicious defense. Marcus came back to my side after Chloe had finished her conversation. He looked troubled. The doctor thinks it might be recurrent food poisoning, Mom. From something you're using at home, maybe we should check your pantry, throw out anything old. There it was. Chloe's suggestion, now coming from his mouth, framed as concern. I opened my eyes fully and looked at him. The love in his face was tangled up with a new, reluctant doubt. Chloe was working on him, and it was beginning to take. "That's a good idea, honey," I said softly, "but I'm very careful. I just bought all new herbs last week." This was true. I had after swapping the jars. Perhaps it's something else. The blood work came back faster than before. The doctor returned, her expression professionally neutral. "Mrs. Vance, your blood work shows minor elevations, but nothing conclusive. Certainly nothing indicating the specific compound that was mentioned in your previous visit. Given the pattern and the resolution of your symptoms, I had begun to recover as we waited, sitting up drinking water. This is most consistent with an idiosyncratic reaction, likely to something ingested. I'd advise a careful review of all your food sources." It was a dismissal, a medical shrug. Chloe had succeeded for now. The official record would again read food poisoning, vague and untraceable. Chloe's relief was palpable. She smiled, a tight, victorious little curve of her lips, as she helped gather my things. "See, Ellie, it's just something in your kitchen. We'll help you do a big clean-out. You'll be safe then." The drive home was silent. Marcus was lost in thought. Chloe stared out the window, her posture relaxed for the first time all evening. She believed she had survived a crisis. She believed the medical authority had backed her version of events. She believed I was a foolish old woman, poisoning herself through incompetence, and that her intervention had saved the day and her scheme. They dropped me at my door. Marcus insisted on walking me inside. "I don't like leaving you alone," he said, his worry a tangible weight in the quiet living room. "I'll be fine, Marcus. It's past. I'm just tired." He hugged me, a long, hard hug. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too," I whispered, and I meant it with a ferocity that ached. When they were gone, I locked the door. I did not turn on the main lights. I walked to the kitchen and stood at the sink, looking out at the dark garden. The performance was over. The data was collected. Chloe's reaction at the dinner table was proof of her intent. Her swift, malicious campaign to redirect blame at the hospital was proof of her guilt. But it was circumstantial. It was a story I could tell Marcus. But it was not evidence that would hold up to the doubt love could create. He wanted to believe in his wife. He needed something unassailable. I needed the science. I needed to turn the contents of the locked metal box from suspicious substances into confirmed weapons. I needed to link them irrevocably to her. I thought of my old friend, Lorraine. We had trained together as nurses 40 years ago, but she had gone further into toxicology. She had retired from the city crime lab 2 years prior. She was discreet. She was brilliant. And she owed me a favor from a time I had chosen never to speak of, a time involving her brother, and a situation that required silence. I went to the locked box. I removed one of the small glass jars, the one I had taken from the front of the pantry. I did not open it. I placed it in a plain paper bag. Tomorrow I would pay Lorraine a visit. The performance was over. Now the forensic investigation would begin. Lorraine lived in a modest, book-cluttered bungalow on the other side of the county. The drive gave me time to settle my thoughts. I was not bringing her a problem. I was bringing her a sample. I needed her expertise, not her pity. Our history meant she would ask few questions and expect direct answers. She answered the door wearing thick-rimmed glasses and a lab coat over her houseclothes. Her hair was a cloud of silver curls. "Eleanor Vance," she said, her voice a low rumble. "You look like you've been thinking too hard. Come in. The kettle's just boiled." Her living room was also her study. Books on forensic chemistry and toxicology lined the shelves, intermixed with novels and family photos. The cozy disorder was a stark contrast to the sterile precision of her former profession. She brought in a tea tray and set it on a table she cleared of journals with a sweep of her arm. "Thank you for seeing me on short notice, Lorraine. When you call saying you need a professional opinion on a household substance, I know it's not about bleach," she said, sitting across from me. Her eyes, magnified behind her glasses, were sharp and knowing. "What's in the bag, Ellie?" I placed the paper bag on the table between us. "I believe this contains a slow-acting poison. I need it identified, quantified if possible, and I need a written report, discreetly." She didn't flinch. She reached for the bag, opened it, and carefully extracted the glass jar. She held it up to the light from the window, examining the pinkish salt. "Source?" "My daughter-in-law's pantry. There was a second identical jar behind some boxes. I have that one secured at home." Context: I gave it to her without embellishment. The first collapse, the metallic taste, the doctor's mention of an unusual compound. The second collapse, which I admitted was staged. Chloe's reactions, her attempts to blame my house. Lorraine listened, sipping her tea. When I finished, she nodded once. "You were always the best diagnostician on the floor. You connected symptoms long before the machines did." She placed the jar back in the bag. "This will take a few hours. I have a basic setup in the spare room. Gas chromatography is a bit beyond my home kit, but I can do some wet chemistry and cross-reference with my databases. For a full tox screen, I'd need to send it out." "I trust your eyes," I said. "A preliminary identification is what I need. Something concrete." She stood. "Wait here. Read a book. This is more interesting than my Sudoku." She disappeared down the hall with the jar. I did not read. I sat in the worn armchair, listening to the faint sounds from the back of the house, the click of a cabinet, the hum of a small centrifuge, the tapping of a keyboard. This was the nexus where my suspicion would be transmuted into fact. After nearly 2 hours, she returned. She carried a single sheet of paper. Her expression was grave, all professional detachment gone. She handed me the paper and sat down heavily. "It's thallium sulfate," she said, her voice flat. "A crystalline salt, dissolves easily, tasteless when pure, but often has a metallic impurity. It's a cumulative poison, attacks the nervous system, the gastrointestinal tract, the hair follicles, mimics a dozen natural illnesses. The dose in that jar is low concentration, meant for gradual administration. A pinch in a meal every few days. It would lead to a slow, confusing decline. Death would likely be attributed to multiple organ failure or a severe undiagnosed illness." The name meant nothing to me, but the description fit perfectly. The metallic taste, the weakness, the doctor's confusion. I looked at the paper. It was a printed report from a private database, listing the compound, its properties, its toxicology. In the comments section, Lorraine had typed, "Sample consistent with thallium sulfate, low-grade concentration, unsuitable for any household or culinary use." "It's a classic poisoner's choice, Ellie," Lorraine continued quietly. "Hard to detect without specific screening, used in a few industrial processes, accessible if you know where to look and have the money to acquire it discreetly." She leaned forward. "You said there are 2 jars. One was hidden. This shows premeditation. This shows a supply." I folded the paper carefully. "Thank you, Lorraine." "This is a crime," she stated. "You need to go to the police. Now." "I will," I said. "But first I need to understand the why completely. I have the how. I need the why to make it undeniable, especially to my son. Poison is a hidden crime. It requires a hidden motive." Lorraine studied me. "You have an idea." "Inheritance," I said. It's always money or love. My son is not a wealthy man, but I own my house outright. I have savings, investments. To someone with debt or expensive tastes, it could be a motive. You think she's in financial trouble? I think she comes from money and expects it. I think my continued existence delays her full control over my son and any assets that might eventually come to him. I place the folded report in my purse. If I go to the police with just this jar, she can claim she had no idea what it was. A strange gift, a mistaken purchase. She'll say she never used it. She'll say, I planted it. Which is why you need the motive laid bare, Lorraine concluded. She sighed. What do you need from me? Would you be willing to write a formal letter on your former professional letterhead stating your findings, to be used with legal authorities when the time comes? She considered. Yes, for you. But Ellie, be careful. A person who does this, they are dangerous. They are cornered animals when discovered. I know. I stood. I have no intention of cornering her until I have a cage built of solid evidence. She walked me to the door. As I stepped onto her porch, she put a hand on my arm. Your son. Does he suspect? He wants to believe in the woman he loves. He's starting to doubt. But love is a powerful insulator against truth. I need to make the truth too bright to ignore. The drive home felt different. The jar in my locked box was no longer just a suspicious substance. It was thallium sulfate, a poison, a weapon with a name. The report in my purse was cold, hard fact. It was the first unassailable brick in the wall I was building. When I arrived home, I went to my study. I placed Lorraine's report in the metal box with the jars. The motive, however, remained theoretical. I needed a paper trail of my own, financial records, insurance documents. I logged onto my computer. I started with my own affairs, reviewing my will, my accounts. Everything was in order, left primarily to Marcus with a few small bequests to friends and charities. Then I considered the inverse. Not what I was leaving, but what Chloe might have sought to gain prematurely. I thought of life insurance. It was a classic component of such plots. But a policy on my life, taken out by her, would be difficult without my knowledge or consent, unless it was a joint policy with Marcus, or she had forged something. I picked up the phone. I called my insurance agent, a man named Ben, who had handled my policies for 20 years. Ben, it's Eleanor Vance. I'm doing a review of all my coverage, and I want to make sure nothing is out of place. Can you confirm for me all the active policies where I am the insured and the beneficiaries? He was happy to help. He listed my homeowner's policy, my small life insurance policy I'd held for decades, my car insurance, all beneficiaries, Marcus Vance. Nothing new, nothing unusual. Ben, I said, choosing my words. This might sound strange, but has my son or anyone else inquired about taking out any new policies on my life recently? Perhaps as part of some family estate planning? There was a pause on the line. I heard the clicking of a keyboard. You know, Ellie, now that you mention it, about 6 weeks ago, I did get a call from your daughter-in-law, Chloe. She had some questions about the process of taking out a term life policy on an older relative, said she was just exploring options for the family. I told her the insured person would have to consent and undergo a medical exam. She thanked me and said she'd discuss it with you and Marcus. I never heard back. The room seemed to grow very still. 6 weeks ago, around the time the strange tiredness had first begun. She'd been exploring the mechanism. She'd been checking the feasibility. I see, I said, my voice steady. Thank you, Ben. That's very helpful. If anyone makes any further inquiries, especially without my direct involvement, would you please let me know immediately? Of course, Ellie. Is everything all right? Just being thorough, I said. Thank you. I hung up. The call was not proof, but it was a thread I could pull. I knew now where to look. The motive was taking shape, moving from theory towards provable reality. I had the weapon. Now I needed to trace it back to the hand that held it and the reason that hand had squeezed. Marcus called the next day, as I knew he would. His voice carried the weight of a sleepless night. "I'm coming over, Mom. We need to talk. I'll bring lunch." He arrived with sandwiches from a local deli. His face was drawn, the worry lines around his eyes deeper than I had seen them in years. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had researched the poison, where I had planned the trap. Sunlight streamed in, highlighting the dust motes in the air, giving the scene a false sense of peace. "How are you feeling?" he asked, unpacking the food. "Stronger every day," I said, which was true. The strength was of a different kind now. "It's the worry that wears you out, isn't it?" He nodded, not meeting my eyes. "The doctor said it's something in your house. Chloe thinks we should hire a professional to come in and inspect everything, clean everything." I took a slow breath. That's a generous thought, but expensive. I watched him. "Is money tight right now? I know the economy has been difficult." He shrugged, a non-committal gesture. "We're managing. Chloe handles most of the finances. She's better at it. She comes from a family that's used to managing wealth," I said carefully, selecting a pickle from the container. "It must be a pressure maintaining a certain standard for both of you." He looked up then, a flicker of something in his eyes, not suspicion, but a mild surprise. "What do you mean?" "Oh, nothing specific," I said, waving my hand. "Just an observation. She has such refined tastes. The house, her clothes, those orchids she brought, it all comes with a cost. I just hope it's not a burden on you. That's a mother's worry." He was silent for a moment, chewing his sandwich. "She likes nice things. There's nothing wrong with that." "Of course not," I agreed readily. "And you work so hard to provide them. I'm proud of you for that." I let the compliment hang. "It's just that when I was your age, raising you alone, the only future I worried about was yours. Getting you through school, making sure you had what you needed. I didn't have the bandwidth to think about estates and inheritances and long-term financial portfolios. It's a different world." The word estate landed deliberately. I saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "Why are you talking about estates?" he asked, his voice lower. "I'm not really," I said, feigning slight confusion. "It just came to mind. Chloe mentioned something to me a while back about the importance of planning. She's very forward-thinking. It's an admirable quality." I paused as if remembering. "Actually, I think she may have even called my insurance agent, Ben, with some questions. She's so thorough." Now his full attention was on me. "She called Ben? When?" "Oh, I'm not sure. A few weeks ago, maybe. He mentioned it when I spoke to him yesterday about updating my own policy." This was a calculated lie, a blend of truth and fiction to provoke a reaction. I told him it was sweet of her to be so proactive about family security. Marcus put his sandwich down. He stared at the tabletop. "She didn't tell me that." "I'm sure she meant to," I said softly. "It probably just slipped her mind. Or she didn't want to bother you. You have enough on your plate." The seed was planted. I could see it taking root in the furrow of his brow. He was remembering, connecting disjointed pieces. I needed to water it with something purer, to remind him of what was being threatened. "Enough of this dull talk," I said, forcing a brighter tone. "Come with me. I found a box of old photos in the attic last week. I've been meaning to go through them." I led him into the living room, to the large oak trunk that served as a coffee table. I lifted the lid. Inside were neatly organized photo albums and loose pictures in envelopes. I pulled out an album labeled Marcus, 5 to 10. We sat side by side on the sofa. I opened the album. There he was, a gap-toothed boy on his first bicycle, me running beside him, my hand on the seat. There was a picture of us baking cookies, flour smeared on both our faces. "You hated getting your hands sticky," I said, pointing. "You'd hold out your fingers and say, 'Mama, wipe.'" A small smile touched his lips. "I remember that bowl, the blue one. It broke the year you left for college. I was devastated." We turned pages. Birthdays. Christmases with just the two of us. A photo of me in my nurse's uniform leaning down to kiss him goodnight. The evidence of a life built together, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. You worked so many night shifts, he murmured, tracing the image of my uniform. It was the only way. The daycare was cheaper at night, and Mrs. Henderson next door would listen for you. I'd call every 3 hours. You never complained. What was there to complain about? I said, looking at him. I had you. He turned another page and found a picture from his graduation. I was gripping his arm, my face radiant with a pride so fierce it still shone from the faded paper. He was looking at the camera, but his hand was over mine. You gave me everything, he said, his voice thick, and you gave me purpose. I closed the album gently. That's all a parent can ask for, to see their child grow into a good, kind man, to know the love was enough. The room was quiet. The ghosts of our past filled the space between us, solid and real. Mom, he began, then stopped. He struggled for words. These episodes, they've scared me. And Chloe, she's been so focused on the idea that it's something here, in your house. She's insistent. She's worried, I offered, giving him an out. Is she? The question was quiet, almost to himself. He wasn't asking me. He was beginning to ask the air, the universe, the unsettling new pattern in his life. Sometimes the way she talks about it, it's like she's already decided what happened, like she's building a case. I placed my hand over his. I said nothing. Anything I added now would be too obvious. He had to travel this path in his own mind. Why would she call Ben? He asked, returning to the sharper point. Why wouldn't she talk to me about it first? You'll have to ask her, honey. I kept my voice neutral. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. She loves you. She wants what's best for your future. He stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that looked out on my garden. Our future. Our future shouldn't involve. He didn't finish the sentence. He shook his head. I'm probably overthinking. It's just the stress. It's a lot to carry, I agreed. You don't have to carry it alone. You can always talk to me about anything. No judgments. Just us. He turned back to me, his expression a conflict of love and dawning, horrible doubt. The foundation of his marriage had developed a hairline crack. I had not smashed it with accusations. I had simply pointed out the strange discoloration on the wall and handed him a flashlight. I should go, he said, his voice tired. I have some work to finish. I walked him to the door. He hugged me, and this time his embrace felt different. It was seeking comfort, seeking the solid ground I represented. After he left, I returned to the living room. I put the photo album back in the trunk. My hands were steady. The emotional terrain had been navigated with precision. Marcus was no longer simply worried about my health. He was uneasy about his wife's behavior. The insulation of love was thinning. The next phase required more than unease. It required a document, a piece of paper with numbers and signatures that screamed motive. Lorraine had given me the how. My conversation with Ben had given me a direction. Now I needed to find the policy itself. I needed to follow the money to its source. The quiet after Marcus left was not empty. It was charged with purpose. The look in his eyes, that flicker of confused betrayal, had been the final confirmation I needed. The emotional groundwork was laid. Now I needed the architecture of fact. I went to my study and called Lorraine. She answered on the second ring. Ellie, I was just about to call you. I drafted that letter. Thank you. I need another kind of help now, a different sort of investigation. Financial? Yes. My insurance agent mentioned Chloe had made inquiries. There's no policy with my regular agent, but she's thorough. She would have found another way. Lorraine was silent for a moment. You think she took out a policy elsewhere, without your knowledge? I do. It would require forgery, a faked signature, or perhaps she intercepted a mailing. She has access to our house, to my son's files. She could have obtained my personal details easily. All right, Lorraine said. I could hear her typing already. Give me the details. Full name, date of birth, social security number. I still have some contacts. discreet ones, people who owe me favors in places where records are kept. I provided the information. There was no hesitation in sharing it. Our history had long ago erased such boundaries. "It might take a day or two," she said. "I'll call you." The wait was not idle. I reviewed my own financial statements again, looking for any unusual withdrawals or changes. Nothing. Chloe was smarter than that. She wouldn't steal from accounts I monitored. She would create a new asset, a future payout. 2 days later, Lorraine called. Her voice was grim. "Meet me, not at my house, the park by the old water tower. 1 hour." The park was nearly empty, a cool breeze rustling the late autumn leaves. Lorraine sat on a bench, a manila envelope beside her. She didn't smile when I approached. "Sit," she said. I sat. She handed me the envelope. "It's from a private broker, not a major national chain. A smaller firm that specializes in higher risk, higher value policies. Less scrutiny if you know how to navigate the system." I opened the envelope. Inside was a photocopy of an application for a life insurance policy. The insured, Eleanor Marie Vance. The proposed coverage amount, $1 million. The beneficiary, Marcus Allen Vance. The contingent beneficiary, Chloe Elizabeth Vance. My breath caught, not in shock, but in a cold, vindicated clarity. There it was. The application was dated 7 weeks ago. The signature in the insured's box was a clumsy forgery of my handwriting. It was close, but the looping tail of my Y was wrong. I had always made it sharp. This one was rounded. "How did she manage this?" I asked, my voice flat. "The broker is flexible. For a large commission, he is known to be lenient with documentation. According to my source, the medical exam requirement was waived due to previous medical records being provided. Those records were likely altered or fabricated. The initial premium was paid from a joint account held by Marcus and Chloe Vance." Lorraine pointed to a note attached. "The policy was approved and activated 3 days after this application was submitted." I stared at the number. $1 million. My life, given a price tag. To Chloe, it was a sum that warranted planning, risk, and meticulous cruelty. To me, it was just a number that proved her guilt. "This is actionable, Ellie. This is fraud. This is attempted murder for financial gain. You have to go to the police now." "I will," I said, folding the documents back into the envelope. "But not yet. If I go now, it becomes a criminal case. It becomes detectives and lawyers and a trial where Marcus will be torn apart, where he will be forced to testify against his wife, where every detail of our family will become public record." "So what will you do?" Lorraine's eyes were sharp behind her glasses. "I will give him a choice, in private, with all the evidence laid before him. I will force him to see the truth completely without the buffer of police procedure or legal arguments. He needs to choose, knowing everything. Then we go to the authorities together. Or he does. But the first confrontation must be between us as a family." Lorraine considered this. She nodded slowly. "You're protecting him, even now." "I'm giving him a chance to do the right thing before the world forces him to. It's the last piece of his education." I stood, holding the envelope. "Thank you, Lorraine. This is the final piece. Be careful," she said again, her warning carrying the weight of our shared history. "The documents are one thing. Facing her with them is another. She will fight. I expect her to." I drove home, the envelope on the passenger seat. I felt no triumph, only a solemn finality. The puzzle was complete. The motive was no longer a theory. It was a $1 million fact. The means were in a locked box in my study, identified by a toxicologist's report. The opportunity was documented in my own memory and in Chloe's panicked reactions. That evening, I prepared. I made copies of everything. I printed Lorraine's formal letter on her former lab's letterhead, which she had dropped at my house that afternoon. I printed the insurance application and the notes from Lorraine's contact. I placed the original documents in a separate folder. I would show Marcus the originals. The copies were for the police when the time came. I then wrote a simple, factual timeline. I listed the dates, the first dinner and collapse, Chloe's call to my insurance agent, the date on the forged application, the second dinner and collapse, my retrieval of the jars, Lorraine's analysis. It was a chronology of betrayal. Finally, I placed a small digital voice recorder in the pocket of my favorite cardigan. I tested it. The quality was clear. I was not legally savvy enough to know if a secret recording would be admissible in court in our state, but I didn't need it for court. I needed it for Marcus. I needed him to hear her voice, her reactions, in the unguarded moment of exposure. He needed to hear the truth from her own lips before she had a chance to construct a lawyerly lie. The plan was set. I would invite them for dinner one final time, not at my house where the memories of my collapses hung in the air. A neutral location would seem less confrontational, less like a trap. I would suggest a quiet, upscale restaurant Chloe liked. She would be disarmed by the familiar setting, by the public nature of it. She would not expect an ambush over dessert in a place with white tablecloths. I picked up the phone. I called Marcus. He sounded tired. "Marcus, honey, I've been doing a lot of thinking. All this hospital drama has put a strain on everyone. I want to make peace, to clear the air. Let me take you and Chloe out to dinner. That new French place she mentioned. My treat. A proper, calm dinner where we can just talk. No cooking, no stress." He was silent for a long moment. "Are you sure, Mom? You don't have to do that." "I want to. For me. I need to feel like we're still a family. Please." I could hear the relief in his sigh. He wanted the conflict to end. He wanted his mother and his wife to be at peace. "Okay, that sounds good. When?" "Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. I'll make the reservation." I hung up. The reservation was not for reconciliation, it was for a reckoning. Every piece was in place. The lab report, the poison, the insurance policy, the timeline. All I had to do was present them, calmly, and watch the house of cards she had built come down. I checked the battery on the voice recorder. It was full. I was ready. The maitre d' led us to a quiet corner table at La Cloche. The restaurant was all soft lighting, murmured conversations, and the discreet clink of silverware. I had chosen it for its atmosphere of controlled civility. Outbursts here would be shocking, conspicuous. Chloe approved of the choice. I saw it in the slight relaxation of her shoulders as she sat. She was in her element. Marcus pulled out my chair. His smile was strained but genuine. "This was a nice idea, Mom. Thank you." "My pleasure," I said, smoothing the linen napkin on my lap. My cardigan was buttoned, the small, hard shape of the voice recorder, a familiar weight in my right pocket. My purse, containing the folder of documents, rested against my foot under the table. Dinner proceeded with polite, brittle conversation. We discussed the menu, the wine. Chloe recommended the scallops. Marcus talked about a project at work. I asked Chloe about her charity board. She answered in smooth, practiced paragraphs. The performance of a perfect family continued through the appetizers and the main course. I ate slowly, tasting nothing, conserving my energy for the final act. When the plates were cleared and coffee was served, I placed my spoon neatly beside my saucer. The time had come. "There's something I need to discuss with both of you," I said, my voice calm and clear. "It's about my recent illnesses." Marcus's expression immediately tightened into concern. Chloe's polished smile remained, but her eyes became watchful. "Of course, Ellie. We've all been so worried." "I know you have, and I've been doing some investigating of my own." I reached down and lifted my purse onto my lap. I opened it and withdrew the folder. I placed it on the table between the bread basket and the flickering candle. "The doctors called it food poisoning, but I am a nurse. I know the difference between a spoiled ingredient and a toxin." Chloe's smile faltered. "A toxin? What are you saying?" I ignored her question. I opened the folder. I removed the first sheet, the printed timeline. I slid it toward Marcus. "This is a chronology. It begins with the first dinner at your house. The night I collapsed after you used your special finishing salt, Chloe. That salt was perfectly safe, Chloe said, her voice gaining an edge. It was a gourmet product. It was, I agreed. I removed the second document, Lorraine's formal letter on the lab letterhead. I placed it over the timeline. This is a report from a retired toxicologist with the City Crime Lab. She analyzed the contents of the jar I took from your pantry, Chloe. The jar you kept hidden behind the pasta boxes. I watched the color drain from her face. The salt is adulterated with thallium sulfate, a cumulative, slow-acting poison, difficult to detect. The symptoms match mine precisely. Marcus was staring at the lab report, his face pale. What jar? What are you talking about? The night you came to check on me when you brought my glasses, I said, turning to him. After you left, I went to your house. I had a key. I found 2 identical jars in your pantry. I took them. One has been analyzed. I tapped the report. The other is in a lockbox at my home. Evidence. You broke into our house? Chloe's voice was a sharp whisper, her composure cracking. I entered my son's home with a key. Yes, to collect evidence of a crime. My tone remained even. You see, after the second dinner, the one at my house, I was sure. Your reaction, Chloe, when I pretended to collapse, you weren't concerned. You were confused. The poison you thought you were using should have worked on a different timeline. Your face showed panic that your plan had gone wrong, not fear for my health. Marcus looked from me to Chloe, his eyes wide with dawning horror. Chloe? What is she talking about? She's lying! Chloe's hand gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. She's a sick, paranoid old woman. She's poisoning herself and trying to blame me. Then explain this, I said quietly. I removed the final document, the photocopied insurance application. I slid it directly in front of Marcus. $1 million. On my life. Beneficiary. You. Contingent beneficiary. Your wife. The signature is a forgery. The medical exam was waived based on fabricated records. The premium was paid from your joint account 7 weeks ago, around the time my symptoms began. Marcus picked up the paper. His hands trembled. He stared at the forgery of my signature, then at the beneficiary designation. He looked like a man who had been hit in the stomach. Chloe? He said, her name a broken sound. Is this true? It's not what it looks like, she cried, her voice rising. A few diners at nearby tables glanced over. She lowered her voice to a furious hiss. It was for estate planning, for our future. I was trying to protect us. She's twisting everything. You took out $1 million policy on my mother with a forged signature, Marcus said, each word dropping like a stone. You asked about policies with Ben. You never told me. He looked at the lab report again, then back at her. The salt, the poison. You've been feeding it to her? The directness of the question shattered her last defense. She didn't answer. Her silence was more eloquent than any denial. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw pure, undiluted hatred in her eyes, stripped of all pretense. You vicious old bitch, she spat, her voice low and venomous. You had everything. You had his love, his loyalty. You were always there, in our marriage, in our home, with your perfect motherly advice. He would never be fully mine while you were alive. You were in the way. The restaurant noise seemed to fade away. Her confession, breathed across a candle-lit table, was the final terrible piece. Marcus made a sound, a choked gasp of pain. He pushed his chair back, standing unsteadily. He looked at the woman he had married as if seeing a stranger. You tried to kill my mother. For us, Marcus, she pleaded, reaching for his hand. He recoiled. For our life together. She's just a sick old woman. We would have been free. We would have had the money to start fresh, to have the life we deserve. He stared at her, his face a mask of grief and revulsion. You are talking about murdering my mother. For money, for what you think you deserve. He He took a step back. I don't know you. I remained seated. I closed the folder. The evidence had been presented. The truth had been spoken. My work was done. The rest was between them. I have copies of all these documents, I said, my voice cutting through their private agony. I have the original evidence. I have a recording of this conversation. I placed my hand over my pocket. Tomorrow morning, I am going to the police. You can choose how you face that, Chloe. You can come with me and give a statement, or you can wait for them to come to you. She looked at me, then at Marcus, who was now a statue of betrayal. Her future, her perfect life was collapsing in the elegant ruin of a French restaurant. She had nothing left to say. Marcus turned to me. His eyes were filled with tears. Mom, I'm so sorry. I know, baby, I said softly. I know. He could not stay in that room another second. He turned and walked away, weaving slightly between the tables, leaving Chloe and me alone amidst the soft music and the scent of coffee. Chloe finally looked at me, her expression hollow. You win. This was never a game, I said, gathering my things. It was a diagnosis, and I have just presented the prognosis. The police will be in touch. I stood, placed enough cash on the table to cover the meal, and walked out, leaving her sitting alone at the table, surrounded by the proof of her own destruction. The drive home from the restaurant was conducted in a state of absolute silence within my car. There was no relief, no surge of victory. There was only the stark aftermath of a necessary surgical procedure. The tumor had been exposed and excised, but the body, my family, was left bleeding on the table. I had been home for perhaps an hour when the front door opened without a knock. Marcus stood in the doorway, his face ashen, his eyes red-rimmed. He looked 10 years older. She's at the house, he said, his voice hollow. Packing. She tried to talk. I couldn't listen. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, as if barricading himself against the world. He leaned against it, his strength gone. She kept saying it was for us, that I didn't understand the pressure, that you were a burden on our future. I did not go to him. He needed to stand or fall on his own now. What do you believe, Marcus? He looked at me, his expression shattered. I believe the lab report. I believe the forged signature. I believe what I saw in her eyes at the restaurant. I believe my wife tried to murder my mother. He said each sentence slowly, forcing himself to articulate the unbearable truth. I keep waiting to wake up. This is awake, I said softly. He pushed himself off the door and walked into the living room, sinking onto the sofa where we had looked at photo albums just days before. He put his head in his hands. What do I do, Mom? What do I do now? You choose, I said, sitting in the chair opposite him. You choose what kind of man you are. The kind who protects his family or the kind who excuses a crime against it. She'll go to jail. It wasn't a question. It was a realization. Yes, for attempted murder and fraud, at the very least. I paused. You can choose to support the prosecution, or you can choose to be silent. But your silence will be a choice, too. He was silent for a long time. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I need to hear it from her, he said, finally looking up. One more time, without the performance. I need to be sure I'm not making a mistake. Then you should go back. Talk to her. I will be here. He nodded, a mechanical gesture. He stood, his movements heavy. He left without another word. I did not sleep. I sat in my chair, the folder of evidence on the coffee table. I thought not of Chloe, but of my son, in the home they had shared, facing the ruin of his marriage and the horror of his wife's actions. I had given him the truth, but I could not carry this burden for him. It was nearly dawn when he returned. He let himself in, his footsteps slow on the hardwood floor. He came into the living room. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were clearer, the confusion burned away by a harsh, new certainty. "She admitted it," he said. His voice was flat, drained of all emotion. Not at first. She tried the excuses again. Then she got angry. "She said I was weak for being so tied to you. She said the money would have freed me too. She said she did it because she loved me, and love requires difficult choices." He let out a short, bitter breath. "She really believes that. She thinks she's the victim of our closeness." He walked to the window, looking out at the dark garden. "I told her to leave, to take her things and go to her parents. I told her I would be contacting a lawyer in the morning to start divorce proceedings. And I told her I would be giving my full statement to the police, along with all the evidence." He turned to face me. She broke down then. Real tears, I think. Not for what she did, but because she lost. She said if I did that, her life would be over. Her family would disown her. She begged me to just let the divorce happen, to let her go quietly. "What did you say?" I said no. The words were simple and final. I said you could have died. I said she made a plan to kill you over months. There's no quiet for that. A profound sorrow settled in the room, but with it, a fragile sense of rightness. My son had chosen. The loyalty had been tested in the cruelest furnace, and it had held. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we go to the police. Together. We bring them everything. The jars, the lab report, the insurance documents, the timeline. We give them the name of my friend, the toxicologist. We give them the recording from the restaurant. We answer every question." He nodded. "Okay. It will be difficult. There will be questions, headlines maybe. It will be painful. It's already painful," he said, "but letting her walk away would be worse. It would make me complicit. It would dishonor you and everything you did to protect yourself." He came and sat on the sofa again closer to me. "You figured it all out. By yourself. You never panicked. You just built the case." "I am a nurse," I said. "I assess symptoms. I identify the pathogen. I prescribe the treatment." "You saved your own life," he said, and a tear finally escaped, tracing a path down his cheek. "And you probably saved mine, too, from living a life with that, not knowing what she was." I reached out and took his hand. It was cold. "We will get through this, one step at a time." We sat there as the sky lightened from black to deep blue to gray. We did not speak much. There was no need. The understanding between us was complete. The family had been attacked from within, and we had purged the infection. The cost was his marriage, his innocence, a part of his heart. But the core, the bond between us, was intact. It was scarred, but it was strong. As full morning arrived, I made coffee. We drank it at the kitchen table. Then, methodically, we gathered the evidence. The metal box. The folder. I made sure the voice recorder was ready. "Are you ready?" I asked him. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders. "Yes." We drove to the police station in my car. We walked in together and asked to speak to a detective regarding an attempted murder case. We were shown to a small, plain room. A detective, a man in his 50s with a tired, intelligent face, joined us. I placed the metal box and the folder on the table. "Detective," I said, "my name is Eleanor Vance. This is my son, Marcus. We are here to report a crime. My daughter-in-law, Chloe Vance, has been attempting to poison me for financial gain. We have the evidence here." And so we began. The process with the police was methodical and thorough. It took hours. We gave our statements separately. The detective, a man named Harris, examined the evidence with a professional, dispassionate eye. He took possession of the jars, the lab report, the insurance documents. He listened to the recording from the restaurant. He asked precise, careful questions. When we left the station, the sun was high in the sky. The world outside looked exactly the same, but everything had changed. The weeks that followed were a series of necessary, difficult steps. Marcus filed for divorce. He moved out of the house he had shared with Chloe and into a temporary apartment. The police investigation moved forward. Chloe was arrested and charged with attempted murder, aggravated assault, and insurance fraud. Her family, as she had predicted, retained a formidable lawyer but distanced themselves from her privately. The scandal was contained, but it was a stain. I called my insurance agent, Ben, and provided him with the police report number. The $1 million policy was canceled and voided, the premiums returned. My own estate planning documents remained unchanged. Marcus came to my house often. At first, he came in the evenings after work, quiet and exhausted. We did not talk much about the case. We watched old movies. I cooked simple meals. He helped with tasks around the house, fixing a loose step on the porch, cleaning the gutters. The physical work seemed to soothe him. One Saturday morning, several weeks after the arrest, I was in my garden. It was a cool, clear day, the kind of autumn morning that feels like a gift. I was cutting back the spent basil plants, preparing the soil for its winter rest. The rosemary and thyme, hardy and evergreen, still thrived. I felt the sun warm on my back, the familiar good ache in my knees from kneeling on the pad. I heard the gate latch click. Marcus came in wearing an old sweatshirt and jeans. He carried a cardboard tray with 2 coffee cups. "I brought reinforcements," he said, offering me a cup. Perfect timing. I took it, the heat welcome against my fingers. I sat back on my heels. He lowered himself to sit on the edge of the stone path, facing me. We drank our coffee in silence for a few minutes, listening to the birds. "The detective called yesterday," Marcus said finally. "They traced the thallium sulfate. It was purchased through a chemical supply company that doesn't ask many questions. The order was placed online, paid for with a credit card in her name, shipped to a P.O. box she rented. They have the records." I nodded. It was the final mechanical link in the chain. "So the case is solid?" "Very. Her lawyer is talking about a plea deal to avoid a trial." He stared into his coffee. "I have to give a victim impact statement if it goes to sentencing." "You'll know what to say." "I don't know if I want to say anything at all. Seeing her in that courtroom—" He shook his head. "It feels like a lifetime ago." "It was a different life," I agreed. He was quiet again. Then he said, "I put the house on the market. It feels wrong to live there. Too many echoes." "That's sensible." I was thinking, after it sells, I might look for something smaller, closer to here. I looked at him. He wasn't looking at me. He was studying the rosemary bush as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. The offer, the desire to be near, was clear, but without pressure. "That would be nice," I said. "There's that new development a few streets over. Quiet, good trees." A small, real smile touched his lips. "I'll check it out." He finished his coffee and stood. He took the pruning shears from where I'd laid them. "Where do you want me to start?" I pointed to the far end of the garden bed. "The lavender needs deadheading. Be gentle with the woody stems." He set to work. I returned to clearing the basil. We worked side by side for an hour. The only sounds, the snip of shears, the rustle of plants, the distant hum of a lawnmower. There was no need to fill the silence. It was a comfortable, healing quiet. This was the restoration, not a dramatic victory, but a gradual return to peace. The poison was out of our systems. The threat was locked away, facing the consequences of her own choices. My revenge was not in her punishment, though that was just. My revenge was in this: the safety of my home, the strength of my son, the clean smell of earth on my hands. It was in the fact that I could sit in my garden without fear, that the herbs I grew were for cooking and fragrance, not for suspicion. Later, we went inside. I washed the dirt from my hands at the kitchen sink. Marcus scrubbed his at the sink beside me. Our reflections in the window were clear, side by side. "I'm making soup for dinner," I said. "Will you stay?" "Yes," he said. "I'd like that." He dried his hands and began setting the table for 2. I took onions and carrots from the pantry. I filled a pot with water. The routines of the kitchen, the patterns of care, resumed. They were the same actions as before, but they were different now. They were no longer performed under a shadow. They were simply what we did, how we lived, how. The story was over. The tasting test had concluded. The bitterness had been identified, isolated, and removed. What remained was the foundational flavor of our lives, simple, nourishing, and finally, safe.